Alright, shalom to the Israelite community. Alright, Israelites, you know, it's a whole lot going on in the Jewish community that they will not tell you about and that they kind of keep secret because they don't want to spoil what they got going on. They don't want to spoil the Israelite heritage that they done acquired, and they don't want it to be in question in general public, but behind closed doors. Man, there's a lot going on, and that is fraction in the Jewish heritage, between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, and that, they don't just get along, they'll get along in public, but behind closed doors, man, they've been fighting over who will control the Israelite heritage and who would be seen as the Israelites. And I want to try to explain what's going on secretly. We Israelites in captivity got to see everybody that's claiming the Israelite heritage. We got to know what they all doing. We got to know what everybody doing with our title and with our name and so forth. So, this is a little some of it. First I want to start this off, and then this is not from me, this is from them, and this is from a Sephardi. This is from a Sephardi explaining how they feel. You know what I'm saying about Ashkenazi with their heritage. Now I done went over this plenty times, but I feel like this is the perfect time to share this information again. Look, the Sephardic idea has always been understood in the terms of political moderation and community unity. Rarely did the Sephardim lose their internal cohesion, that is, until the process of cultural erosion set in. Following the Ashkenazi lead. So what this Sephardi or Sephardim is saying that they was all right, man, until Ashkenazi got in and then start trying to lead the way, and then how that they was all a community unity, and then you can kind of see that too around the world, because you got Jewish communities in Africa, you got Jewish communities in Asia, you got Jewish communities, all over. That was in China, in the Malaysian islands, in everywhere in Asia and in the East. Now the differences is gonna come from the European Jews who are considered Ashkenazi, but it's like a little more history, to that, and I explain Ashkenazi origin and the Israelite heritage, but alright, check this out. That Ashkenazi is not liked. Ashkenazi is not liked in the Jewish world, in the Asian nations, because they see Ashkenazi as a newcomer to the Israelite heritage. You know what I'm saying? That's like your Chinese Jews. They don't see Ashkenazi as the original Israelite, because Ashkenazi came later on, and their perception of an Israelite or the people who's claiming the Israelite heritage kind of like always looked at like these folks here. I'm going to show you. Looked at like these folks here. Somebody that looked close and similar meant to them. You see what I'm saying? So when you look at these Asian Jews or Chinese Jews, you see they kind of like almost resemble the Sephardim or the Arabic Jew, and they can be dark skinned and kind of favor, you know what I'm saying, got a little resemblance, you know what I'm saying, to all the Jews that's considered Sephardic or Sephardim or Sephardi. Now look here, let's go over this again. Look, the Sephardic idea has always been understood in terms of political moderation and community unity. Rarely did Sephardim lose their internal cohesion, that is, until the process of cultural erosion set in. So then they say that they heritage started to fall apart. You know what I'm saying? When Ashkenazi got in it, and Ashkenazi wrestled control from them. Look, that is until the process of cultural erosion setting following the Ashkenazi lead. Sephardim abandoned their traditional culture and adapted to the fractious Ashkenazi model. They didn't have no choice. It was done by force. Under the rubric of a single Jewish nation, the Sephardi particularity with its cultural genius and sophisticated social morals has become a lost value. The Ashkenazi culture with its deeply unsettled relationship to the larger world has now become the Jewish standard. So they saying that basically that when Ashkenazi got in the picture, that their unity with Jewishness and Jewish culture around the world kind of like come to a halt, and that is, fractious, is broke up, and it's not the same, and that, how that the Sephardi would genuinely, like unity, which they got unity with the Eastern Jews, but not with the Western Jews or the Jews who control, the West, who would be Ashkenazi. And then what I want to explain is that, they want to get rid of Ashkenazi. They want Ashkenazi out the promised land. They want Ashkenazi out the promised land, and you can kind of like see this. That's like how China is giving the Iran, the ancient Persian Empire, giving them weapons, and their weapons that they're giving them is to fight Ashkenazi. All the nations in the East are kind of like getting weapons to resist Ashkenazi, and especially the Arabic tribes who those Sephardis would be kin to. That they are arming themselves, man, and then they done come up with an organization by the name of BRICS. And BRICS is to wrestle control of trade and the economy from Ashkenazi control. And we know that Ashkenazi control the West through the European nations, and how America is one of its biggest ally or biggest partner, and that how that they control America too. Ashkenazi do man control the whole West, and that how the Sephardi and Sephardi control the East, and that's because that they been had trade and established trade in the Eastern nations long ago, way before Ashkenazi got its start and so forth, and or even came to the Asian nations. Is that the Asians seen the Sephardi as the Israelites? So that when Ashkenazi come on the scene, that it's been a constant battle behind closed doors. Man, I say that all the wars in the world is kind of related to those two groups fighting over the Israelite heritage. Like, take this for instance, man, to show you. Look, the Ashkenazi had come to the Russian Empire, spoke Russian, but let me see. All right, spoke Russian. Let me see, where am I? All right, begin to. All right, the Ashkenazi came to to Russia, and then from Russia, that they would go off into the Asian nations and so forth, basically following the Sephardi. That's like the Sephardi a long time ago, after being kicked out of the promised land by the Romans, who was Ashkenazi kin, part of the Japhetic tribes, when they destroyed Herd Edomite temple that, they would go over, meaning to Spain, and go across North Africa and settle in Spain and Portugal and so forth. And then from there, they would come over to the Americas and colonize it. The Sephardis did. And one of their first synagogues was set up by Aaron Lopez. They started the transatlantic slave trade. They always dealt in slaves and so forth. And then how did they responsible for the transatlantic slave trade? But then after that, Ashkenazi will follow them over there and wrestle control of America from the Sephardis as well as Europe, when the Sephardi settled in different parts of Europe in after 70 A.D., after they was kicked out the promised land by the Romans, who was Ashkenazi kinfolks and so forth. And then they would settle in Europe, in France and Italy and so forth. But Ashkenazi would eventually get rid of them and take their power from them. And then how that they would go to the Eastern nations and so forth. And then they would set up and convert Jewish, the Chinese and the Indians and so forth, convert them or mate with them from trade. You see what I'm saying? So them coming to the Asian nations before Ashkenazi, the Asians would see the Sephardis as the Israelites. That's like, look, all right, about this time, the Russian Ashkenazi Jew began to reach Shanghai from Siberia, much in North China. They possess entirely different backgrounds, professional outlook on life than those of the Sephardi brethren. The Sephardim had come from the British and spoke English and became and dealt with them justly. They wholeheartedly supported the empire. The Ashkenazi had come from the Russian Empire, spoke Russian, but because they had suffered much persecution, they considered it all right. So the Sephardis got kicked out of Europe and went and settled in the East, and then Ashkenazi will follow them, but Ashkenazi wasn't able to get a whole establishment in the East, and was just there a little bit doing trade, because wherever Sephardim went, Ashkenazi was a step behind them. All right, the Ashkenazi Jews haven't come much later, established themselves in retail business and opened boarding houses and bars for the numerous foreign troops who were stationed in Shanghai. They come there with the British Empire and took over, and got their trade in. They mostly used their European counterpart that was Christians to go off into these different nations in the East, to take over. And then that's what this individual is talking about, that how Ashkenazi cultural erosion setting following the Ashkenazi lead, that the Sephardim abandoned their traditional culture. They was forced to adapt to Ashkenazi violent ways and so forth. But this is what I want to show also, is that the Eastern nations are trying to uproot Ashkenazi and get him out of the promised land. Get him out of the promised land. So then, if Ashkenazi is kicked out of the promised land, if Ashkenazi is kicked out of the promised land and chased away, then the Sephardis in the Eastern nations get to take over from from the BRICS organization that they created, and then they can go off into Africa and trade with the Africans and so forth, and it'd be like good old ancient times and so forth. Ashkenazi is on the verge, of losing its power that it once had, and how it dominated the world for a long time from the Western nations, and that it controlled from Europe and the Americas that it controlled. But now that is shifting and so forth, and that the powers is starting to be in the Asians' hands, who is controlled in the background by the Asian Jews. You see, the Sephardi Jews, these are they kids, you know what I'm saying? And then this is the trip. Look, the forgotten Jews of China? Are they also part of the lost tribes of Israel? Man, I done explained plenty times how it wasn't no lost tribes of Israel, and how we was all in the land until we got chased out during the Babylonian wars, and how we went into Africa to do the Egyptian religion, which caused the transatlantic slave trade. Now, all these folks been hiding our heritage and ain't want us to be who we are, and ain't accepted us as Israelites. But you know, we finna start bringing out information, man, to where they ain't gonna have no choice but to look at us as who we are, the Israelites. All right, look, there goes some Sephardis right here. Sephardis right here. And then as Randanites, man, the those are the Sephardis that went into China. You know, they had pigmentation and so forth, so it was easy for them to go amongst a degree of people that had a degree of pigmentation, and settle and trade and mate with them. Not like Ashkenazi, who is considered a full so-called Caucasian, or what you would call a white person, and how that they wasn't just able to get all the way into the Asian nations and set up and so forth. Ashkenazi migrated to these into the Asian nations way much later, and then how that they are not, seen as the original Israelites, because the Asians seen the Sephardi as the Israelites. They seen the Sephardi's as the Israelites. And man, you can look in ancient history, and them folks will tell you the classic Sephardic Judaism made in China. See, that's where your Asians get their Israelite heritage from, the Sephardis, who were the Randanites, who traded all over the world, especially that Silk Road. They controlled it and trying to get it crunked back up, and how did it went from west meant to east, or east to west, and then it even went down into Africa and so forth. So they trying to reestablish that with the organization that they call BRICS, and then a lot of those Jews that went into China and so forth come from what they call the Baghdadi, the the Baghdad the Baghdadi Jews. You know what I'm saying? That come from what they call Iraq, but ancient Babylon. You see what I'm saying? And that how that they would go east. It's easily, man, for them to go east, man, from Baghdad, or ancient Babylon and so forth, and then go east and do trade. So the Chinese Jews always seen the Sephardi's as the Israelites, and then that's why come this is taking place
in the Middle East that's capturing global attention. China has reportedly sent 40 fighter jets to Iran, a move that many analysts view as a potential game changer. This decision comes amid rising tensions in the region.
See, and that's because Ashkenazi attacked them. You see, because Iran is part of the Eastern nations, and then that how it always seen the Sephardi's as the original Israelites. Even Islam seen the Sephardim as the Israelites and so forth. And that, I explained how in 130 BC, how a whole bunch of Arabic tribes were converted to Judaism under the Maccabees, who were Amorites. But that the Iran gonna see Sephardi as the original Israelites, like the rest of these Asian nations, and then how that they don't see Ashkenazi as the real Israelites and so forth. So, that's the war that's slick going on today. That's like your boy Putin. Putin only see the Sephardi's as the Israelites and so forth. And then I got images with Ashkenazi, with with the Sephardi's seeing Ashkenazi as the Israelites, and then took pictures with all the ancient rabbis and so forth, and that they don't see they don't see they don't see Ashkenazi as the Israelites. You see right here. Look at this. You see that? You see your boy Putin. Putin right there. He's with the Sephardis. There's a Sephardis right there. That is not Ashkenazi right there. And that how all of them is going to be kindred to the Eastern Jews, the Chinese Jews. They going to be kin to the Chinese Jews. And they like all one family. They all one family. And that's their leader. Yasser something, man. He's awful, man, and he hate us real Israelites. Now, these are the folks that don't want to see us as Israelites also. They don't want to see us as Israelites, and they try to keep our Israelite heritage locked out by any means necessary. And then that's why I've been trying to explain to Ashkenazi how they need to come on and settle this Israelite issue and be the first to reach out to us, because if they the first to reach out to us, then we're gonna be cool with them in the end when we come home. But if they don't, then they gonna be locked out of the Israelite heritage forever. And they probably won't get a chance to come back in, because we'll know what's going on and so forth. This is where the Sephardi Jews come from in Babylon. They come from Sippar. Sippar is Sephardim, and Sephardim is the foundation word for Sephardic, Sephardi, and Sephardim. And then that's where they come from off the Euphrates, and that how they was Amorites. They was Amorites, and we know that the Amorite tribes been some are everywhere, all over the earth, doing trade and so forth. You know what I'm saying? And that how that they are not Israelites, but I explained how they got into our heritage under Joshua as the Gabonites, and that how that they always stuck around our heritage. And then when we got chased out the promised land during the Babylonian wars by some folks that was kindred to them, that they stuck around and didn't go into Africa with us, and then how that they consumed our Israelite heritage, and how that they had been in our heritage way longer than Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi come in as the as Scythians. As Scythians. Ashkenazi was called Scythians in the ancient days, and they controlled the Chaldean army, and they were settled in our land. They were settled in our land after the Babylonian wars and what's called Scythopolis. This is what, in ancient times, what the original Israelites looked it like. You know, this is what the real Israelites looked it like. If you was to go find the ancient monuments and so forth, and you was to look at them, and that this is what the Israelite looked like. And it's different from the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi. We was, in war with the Assyrian Empire, because we didn't want to stop doing the Egyptian religion. And then, we was starting to be driven and kicked off the land. We was having all kind of problems, because we didn't want to do right and so forth. But this is what the real Israelites looked it like. You know, that's what we looked it like. You know, we had locks and, you know, hair and stuff that looked like, you know, cornrows and so forth. Nappy hair, nappy beard and so forth. Alright, Ashkenazi, it's slick. Finna be driven out the land, man, before long, if they don't come settle this Israelite heritage with us and be the first to settle this Israelite heritage, because, you know, the Eastern nations who only seen Sephardim, Sephardic as the Israelites are slick at war with Ashkenazi, and they're fighting them through Islam. You know, they fighting them through Islam. That's like I got a video, who do the religions see as the Israelites, and Christianity see Ashkenazi as the Israelites, because it was developed under Ashkenazi control by Ashkenazi's people and so forth, the Japhetic tribes, you know, in Turkey and so forth. You know, us Israelites, man, we need to wake up, and we need to stop using these folks' history and use the history that's in the Tanakh to explain who we are, because it's keeping these other folks that got control of our heritage and been, you know, in control of our heritage, and it's keeping us locked out. But, you know, it's war going on between the Jewish groups behind closed doors, and they don't want the Israelite community, us, to know about it, and want to keep the world blind and stuff. That's how they've been in control and running things, is because they keep their fights secret and hidden behind closed doors, like they got the Israelite history and its original people hidden and locked out. Well, it's easy for them to lock out other information and things that they do to keep it from the public and so forth. You know, we Israelites got to wake up, man, and see what's going on. So we know that the Eastern nations want to remove Ashkenazi from the promised land and get them gone, get them out the picture. And then, you know, them Palestinians and them Africans and all them folks can enjoy our land. But if Ashkenazi was smart, he'll bring us in, which will allow him to stay, because he would aid us in our, you know, plan to settle our land. That'll keep them in our heritage forever, like our father Noah said that Japhet shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and then that'll be their chance to stay in our heritage and so forth, and we won't be mean in no kind of way to them, and then how we'll extend the olive branch to them. But they ain't smart, because they think that they got a lock on the Israelite heritage, because they got the Christian religion supporting them and see them as Israelites, and they think that it's hard to overcome Christianity and so forth, you know, but it's not. When we Israelites wake up and realize that those religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, come off our broken covenant when we went into Africa to do the Egyptian religion that's stated in the book of Jeremiah, you know, around the Babylonian wars. Alright, Israelites, you know, I just wanted to share that little piece of information, you know, that the Asians don't see Ashkenazi as the Israelites, because they seen Sephardim first from trade. You know, that's a fact. And that's something ain't nobody gonna be able to change, because Ashkenazi acknowledge and know himself that he came into the Asian nations where Sephardi already had a presence. So, you know, that's the slick war that's going on today. We're trying to remove Ashkenazi from the promised land, is that the Asian nations who's at war with with the Western nations always, seeing Sephardi or Sephardim as the Israelites, the people that's in their nation now and that's been there for a long time, and how Ashkenazi pulled up much later. So, that they know the difference between the two. I mean, they know the difference between the two. All right, this is a message from the Israelite Brotherhood.